Hiraku Machio, an ordinary cancer man who spent his entire life confined to a hospital bed, never got the chance to truly live. After his death, the god of this world takes pity on him and offers him to be reborn in another world, this time with complete freedom to live however he wants. But without any hesitation, Hiraku chooses a simple dream he never got to experience before, farming. But by the god's mistake, he accidentally sent Hiraku to the most dangerous, overpowered place imaginable. Our story begins with Hiraku waking up after a while of being bedridden, assuming that he was still in the hospital. Upon exiting his room, he found himself before a servant of his called Anne, who panicked upon realizing that she hadn't made his breakfast yet. To her relief, Hiraku didn't mind that, although he just had issues with being called master. Upon moving next to the kitchen, Hiraku found his breakfast prepared by Ramorius, who hadn't been in there for a while. Once outside, Hiraku met with Rurushi, before being joined up by Tia, who had some business with Gran Maria. Before he knew it, Hiraku found both girls asking if he was having any trouble, only for Hiraku to state that he had a dream, or a memory of his past life, before turning to look at how everyone around was taking care of the farm, which is a life that his old self would have never come close to imagining living. Back then, Hiraku arrived in this world after having another typical conversation that every person who got reincarnated into their worlds has had. According to that god, Hiraku passed away at the age of 39, based on this world's calendar, after a long struggle with an eternal sickness. As such, the god decided to give him a second chance at life in another world. Totally wasn't, because of a certain clumsy god who may have accidentally given him a weak body, which may or may not have resulted in Hiraku's demise. Anyway, hearing this, Hiraku thought that it'd be best to live his new life as a farmer, since he grew interested in farming from TV after watching farmers believing that their earnings are not much, but it's honest work. Although the god had no jurisdiction over agriculture, he thought of having a word with whoever is into that, which made the former bestow Hiraku with the life he's entitled to, as well as the omnipotent farming tool power. Upon waking up in this new world, Hiraku found himself in the woods, where he was so happy for finally having a healthy body, which he'll put to good use in achieving the life he so longed for as a farmer, which he'll have to start from the woods. Although the task seemed daunting initially, he remembered that he had the omnipotent farming tool power, which allowed him to get a hoe that he used to dig the ground in all directions, until the soil became so fluffy that vegetables could grow in it. All was going well when Hiraku realized that he needed access to water, which he couldn't tell where it was due to the sounds of leaves. While he was walking in search of water, a monster passed by, which made him decide on finding somewhere to take shelter. After inspecting the woods further from a slightly elevated place, he made for one particularly gigantic tree, where he decided to turn into his base of operations. However, that still didn't solve the issue of finding a river. No problem, Hiraku decided that if he could find no river around, it'd be better to dig a well instead. With his method of finding water being put into question, Hiraku used his omnipotent farming tool again to summon a shovel, which he used to dig a large hole without ever feeling tired, and he would have dug deeper hadn't he realized that he can't go back to the surface again. Suddenly, after striking the ground, water began to pour out, which showed how lucky he was for digging a well for the first time. Seeing that he cannot feel hunger, Hiraku assumed that that must be one of the benefits of the omnipotent farm tools given to him by the god, but he still decided on finding anything edible while making his base. Unfortunately for him, however, he found nothing. A while later, Hiraku found a sturdy tree in the way, which he summoned an axe to cut it with in one swing. Seeing this, Hiraku was impressed with his powers, which also allowed him with cutting the tree to timbers that he can use for construction with relative ease, until he coincidentally realized that it's starting to get late, and that he needs to figure out how to start a fire before it gets dark. Worse yet, fire wasn't something under the jurisdiction of that god either. As he figured he could start a fire with a piece of glass, it was already too late, which made Hiraku hastily dig a small shelter inside the large tree next to him, where he also made a makeshift plate and 2 cups. Fortunately for Hiraku, his thoughts that he might be doomed if it ever turned dark were all for naught, as he's doing well by now. Whether he was bestowed with good luck from God or the 2 moons above him didn't matter, as he's now in another world. As the sun shined the following morning, Hiraku was surprised as he got too locked in processing timber through trial and error. After making sure that the water in the well is drinkable now, Hiraku remembered to start a fire since the sun was up, which ended in great success. Hiraku then went ahead to cut some more trees, which made him finally feel hungry, thus deciding that he'll start looking for food even if he had to walk for miles. Before he could make that one-step journey, however, Hiraku found himself getting attacked by a savage rabbit, which he eliminated with one strike from his hoe. No pun intended. Although he was saddened by such an unfortunate event, Hiraku buried what wasn't useful of the rabbit's corpse, while dissecting the rest, cook it and eat it. A while later, Hiraku proceeded to make a toilet with what's left of his timber, as well as an entire draining system, before proceeding to do nature's call in peace, until he realized that his privacy is out the window, which required him to build walls to conceal him, even if they were nothing in comparison to modern-day toilets that we all know. Eventually, Hiraku contemplated what type of veggies he should grow while pounding the earth, until he remembered that he had no seeds whatsoever to plant. The next morning, however, Hiraku was in awe at the sight of sprouts everywhere. Not wanting to lose his precious veggies, Hiraku decided to build a fence and prepare some trenches that would ensure that no rabbits will get close to his veggies. As for his food, Hiraku would have to take down any rabbits that tried to attack him again. Although he was worried that the plants he was taking care of might turn out to be decorative plants, he proceeded to make a hut using some new building techniques that you might have seen on TikTok. As the days went on, and while Hiraku began to think that his life was starting to take off, he was surprised to see two dogs sitting before the fences one day, with one of them assumed to be a pregnant female dog. Seeing that they had no intentions of attacking him, Hiraku allowed them in and fed them some boar meat. If anything, Hiraku has always wanted to have a dog since he was a kid. Just as he was wondering about how useful dogs were for farmers, the female dog entered labor, which made Hiraku take her to his hut to give birth there. That night, Hiraku fell asleep after wondering whether he did what needed to be done or not. The next morning, Hiraku panicked after realizing that he fell asleep, only to be delighted later after seeing that the female dog had given birth to healthy puppies, which made him offer her and the male dog the best part of the boar he had hunted to celebrate the delivery. Although Hiraku thought the dogs would leave once they finished their business, he was surprised to see them stay, which made him decide on building a bigger and better house for himself there. As he was happy with how his tomatoes grew, Hiraku thought it best to take care of things inside the farm itself, while the dogs, who will be named Kuro and Yuki, will be responsible for patrolling and hunting. Granted, he named the puppies Kuroichi, Kuroni, Kuro-san and Kuroyon, since they're all black. Again, no pun intended. Delighted by the dogs eating tomatoes, and with his crops growing beyond his ability to collect everything on his own, Hiraku thought he'd just have to do his best. Although the god that reincarnated Hiraku as a farmer after bestowing him with a life of misery by mistake in his first life, that same god realized that he landed Hiraku in a bizarrely dangerous forest, called the Forest of Death. Oblivious that such a mistake was ever made by the god Hiraku, although happy that everything he thought of planting had grown up well, realized that his seeds would be his very own thought process, as the seeds for his plants. He was right, as he tested that with soybeans, and didn't just work as intended, but the plant itself grew as it should when it got the care it needed. However, he also took notice that his potatoes were still having green marks, which indicates that they're dangerous to eat, even if realistically it would need a larger quantity of green potatoes to cause any real health problems. Nevertheless, he decided to cover the exposed parts of the potato with soil. After all, Hiraku was well aware that he lacked the knowledge that other farmers have, so he became even more determined to learn from his own mistakes. Aware that his raison d'etre in this world was thanks to the gods, Hiraku made statues of the gods of this jurisdiction and the god of farming, which made Hiraku feel like things are getting more civilized, primitively that is. Still, that couldn't stop Hiraku from enjoying his culinary skills, which resulted in making a stew of rabbit meat and fresh veggies, which tasted pretty good for him as it was for the dogs, even if the food in general lacked salt. Instead of prioritizing getting spices, Hiraku went ahead to plant an apple tree, a pear tree, and a persimmon tree, even if they were going to take a long time to grow, before proceeding to play with his dogs. As he was patting Kuro while telling him what every imamu would tell you in long ASMR videos, Hiraku discovered that Kuro had a horn, which he assumed to be in the nature of creatures of this world. A while later, Jikaru went ahead with discovering the surrounding areas with Kuro until he eventually found a river not too far from there. Granted, Hiraku decided on preparing a waterway to bring water to his small farm, but with it being a tedious task, Hiraku thought it best to take the slow and steady wins the race approach. As such, he built his own toilet near the river. On his way back, Hiraku was happy that he turned his farming tool into a wheelbarrow, but not as much as Kuro though. That happiness didn't last forever. However, as Hiraku's overexcitement led both him and Kuro to trip on the ground, which made Hiraku realize that he needs to fix the road first. That was definitely important to establish, but Hiraku was even more focused on his farm's expansion, which resulted in a variety of new crops, such as the oil seeds, wheat, and sugar canes. Before he knew it, Hiraku found that some bean sprouts grew into soybeans, even though he still had yet to get rid of his British curse and discover how to make salt, especially since he wants to eat some edamame. After a while of starting his new life in this world, Hiraku began to feel cold. Not that he lost heart, but because the weather got cold. Seeing that the top of the mountain became covered with snow, Hiraku thought it best to make some warm clothing to save him from the winter's cold. He started testing with a giant rabbit's skin, but it smelled horribly bad. Worried that that might start to rot, Hiraku thought it better to stay in a corner in his hut with fire and cry for hours. I came up with that last part, but you get the picture. While he was busy with his farm, Hiraku noticed that a giant spider was sitting next to Kuro, who made to Hiraku's surprise a nice handkerchief for him. Since then, the spider started living up in the giant tree, in exchange of eating potatoes and providing Hiraku with well-made clothes too. Thanks to that spider, Hiraku could now survive the winter and have bed sheets to cover himself with, as well as curtains, thus making him increase on the civilization ladder. Granted, Hiraku couldn't forget to give the spider the name Zabuton. Winter finally arrived, and thanks to Zabuton, Hiraku's preparations for the freezing cold weather were well done. While the dogs were cozy inside the hut, Hiraku assumed that Zabuton might be hibernating outside. Nevertheless, although Hiraku was worried that a fierce storm might blow up his hut, he still had a hot potato to eat, as well as enough provisions to last him throughout the winter, which makes his life good so far, save for not having salt, let alone people to keep him company. A few months later, the winter peaced out and spring came. The puppies grew into fine unicorn versions of dogs before piecing out of the farm on their own, which was a bittersweet moment for Hiraku. As he was lost in thoughts a few days later, Hiraku was surprised that the puppies came back a few days later, each with a partner too, with one of them being injured from a fight with another male dog. Moreover, Zabuton also reappeared after a long while with smaller spiders. While he was happy that his farm was growing bigger, Hiraku got back to working in good spirits when Zabuton rang the alarm bell, which indicated that a threat was approaching. As he followed Kuro, Hiraku was surprised to see an elf girl sitting alone in the woods, while being covered in spider silk, and having the dogs and Zabuton surrounding her from all sides. Surprisingly, Hiraku was able to understand her request for help. As he approached her for help, the girl jumped at him and sucked his blood, which made her dress up and grow, before she thanked him for saving her life. Naturally, that didn't save her from getting attacked by the dogs, which made her become younger once again. After confirming that she had no will to ever harm them, and that she sucked his blood to recover her strength, Hiraku tasked his dogs to never attack her again. Seeing that she was the first to attack the dogs out of necessity to recover her strength at first, Hiraku decided to allow her to consume his own blood once again to recover her lost strength, before deciding to allow her to take as much as she wants whenever she wants. Eventually, Hiraku took the girl to his farm, where she was surprised that such an amazing place exists in the middle of the woods, where she was impressed by the sight of tomatoes too, since it was the very first time she had ever seen them, which made Hiraku give her a tomato to taste. Unlike your average spoiled kids, this girl liked eating that tomato before asking Hiraku to show her the rest of his crops, which he gladly obliged. After enjoying her time at the farm the entire day, the girl thought it best to stay at the hut too, as she held a tomato in one hand and her stats magical table on the other, before introducing herself to Hiraku as Ru. Granted, Hiraku was well aware that she's a vampire, since she sucked his blood twice in one morning, which wasn't surprising. However, he was surprised that she came to the woods because she got in a fight with nobles of her race who wanted to steal her medical research, and since they sent people after her, Ru thought it best to lie low in a remote area until things cool down. Fortunately for her, the vegetables that grew on this farm were so impressive that they might help her out in her research. Surprisingly for her, Hiraku didn't know a thing about the reputation of this forest, despite assuming that he did with his ability to tame those dogs. Aside from that, Ru was impressed by his omnipotent farming tool, which she had never seen such magic used in her long life. On the other hand, Hiraku was also surprised that he managed to meet up with her, as he wasn't sure that there will ever be any more people who would show up in this forest. Before he knew it, Ru asked him if he plans on residing in this farm permanently, because she'd love to pay him a visit every now and then. Hearing this, Hiraku asked her if she'd like to live on this farm as well, to which she agreed to stay a while longer to continue her research, only to be surprised that Hiraku wants her to live here permanently. With the way Hiraku portrayed his request, however, she assumed that he might have had feelings for her all of a sudden, before hearing him being fed up with living on his own without being able to interact with people. In only a matter of time, Hiraku finally understood that Ru assumed that he fell in love with her, and he decided to insist on proposing to her until she actually agreed wholeheartedly, much to his delight. The next morning, Hiraku was delighted by hearing his very first good morning since he came to this world. After learning that Ru had reduced her size for self-explanatory protective reasons, Hiraku told her that he's working on trying to grow some sweet potatoes. Before he knew it, Hiraku called Ru as the very first villager of his soon-to-be village, before realizing that his dogs were there too, as well as Zabuton and her family, which makes Ru to be the 30th villager, give or take. Appalled by the absurdity of such claims, Ru requested that they must try growing medical herbs, to which Hiraku quickly agreed. As the days went on, Hiraku realized that vampires do not like sunlight. Nevertheless, he was happy with Ru being around, especially since she helped in setting up lights in the different buildings of the farm, as well as solving his greatest crisis of lacking any salt, by having him boil water, let alone on the edge of his well. The next morning, Hiraku thought it best to check on his crops and fruits, while Ru decided to get washed up and catch up to him a bit later. Granted, Ru was surprised to see Hiraku's investment in these trees, which grow much differently from normal plants. Ru was also looking forward to seeing how Hiraku's plans to plant chestnut trees would materialize in the future. On the other hand, Hiraku was delighted that Ru had assisted him in making him green tea. That also reminded him of the different types of tea, from oolong and black tea to the green cha tea that's known in Japan. While they were at it, Zubaton rang the bell, which made Hiraku and Ru rush forward to see what was going on. As it turned out, the dogs this time caught an angel, who was begging for mercy. Once freed by Hiraku, the angel managed to heal herself off and concealed her wings, which impressed Hiraku. Ru, however, tried to run away, because that angel was looking for her this entire time. After getting a beating from the dogs, the two were taken to Hiraku's hut, where they had calmed down a bit, especially after the angel learned that Rumus had gotten the same ruthless welcome from the dogs. After a moment of PTSD from the pack's attack, the angel got even more shocked when Ru introduced Hikaru as her husband, even though Ru's face flipped Soviet. Hearing this, the angel introduced herself as Tia. While Hiraku thought that an angel like her was a messenger of God, Ru explained that they're a bunch of warriors that are more like your average gym bro. As for why she's chasing Ru, Tia was after that juicy bounty that was put on Ru, especially back when she was on a rampage. What type of rampage, you ask? Well, Ru would basically demonstrate your average cat behavior by working peacefully in her lab before suddenly blowing everything up. Ru argued that these were mere accidents, but Tia was having none of it. Eventually, Ru admitted that she might have overdone it with her accidents at the lab, before making it clear that she was running away from Tia this whole time. This took Tia by surprise, as she didn't expect Ru to become such a mature person who would admit their weaknesses, which she felt firsthand upon getting humiliated by a pack of dogs. Before long, Ru invited Tia to live in this farm as well, while promising that she'll love the crops and everything else here. To Hiraku's surprise, Ru was even more enthusiastic about showing Tia around than he was, even if he appreciated it. The biggest surprise of all was Ru introducing Zebuton to Tia, which was a hell of a surprise for her. Before she could even recover from the shock, Ru rushed to her to get her to harvest some crops with her. While Tia was impressed by how Hikaru managed to make this entire farm, she got taken for harvest by Ru, before she could even answer if she really wanted to get involved in the farming biz. Before she knew it, Tia found Hiraku handing her a knife to extract some cabbages. As she did, Hikaru made her take a taste of it after putting some seasoning on it, which Tia genuinely liked. Seeing that Tia appreciated fresh veggies, Hikaru pointed out that self-planted ones are even better. By the end of the day, Tia had finished harvesting with everyone else everything they needed, which was fun for her. That night, after enjoying eating strawberries, Tia confessed that she found farming life to be incredibly fulfilling. As he was about to get to work the following morning, Hiraku was surprised to see that Zubaton had brought a bee queen. Seeing that the latter isn't going to resist, Hiraku built a nest for her near the orchard. Granted, the bees have made a gigantic hive in about 10 days. Seeing this, Hiraku began contemplating extracting honey out of their hive. After all, he was well aware that the crops would provide them with flowers needed, but Hiraku thought it best to have flowers planted specifically to feed the bees. While his head was in the clouds, Tia arrived, only to make a U-turn after getting terrified of bees' presence. Eventually, Hiraku managed to finish making a future reservoir for water, which will be redirected from the nearby river. The problem is that Hiraku didn't decide on what type of material to use. He initially thought of stones as the Romans did with their aqueducts, but the terrain itself is too woody, so that's not practical. Wood was also out of the question, as the long distance would make the risk of having distance between each section of the wooden passage a viable risk. Since difficult problems require creative solutions, Hiraku thought it best to use clay, which could serve as a good substitute for concrete. Eventually, the production line of the clay chassis was established, which served in creating a waterway that went from the river to the container. With the elves doing the basic work, and Hiraku filling the seams between each place chassis and strengthening the foundation, the construction moved far much faster than what Hiraku initially assumed. On top of getting access to water, Hiraku also discovered that he can have much easier access to fish, which seemed less vicious than wild rabbits. Oh, joke's on him. A vicious giant fish caught him off guard, which he fortunately eliminated and cooked. As he offered Rumor to have some fish to eat, she thought it best to let Hiraku be the first to take a bite. With Tia agreeing with her, Hiraku took the first bite, which he appreciated so much that he resembled it to salmon. before letting Rumor Tia have portions of their own. Seeing that elves were also eager to eat some fish, Hiraku moved on to cook them some. Later, Hiraku couldn't help but be surprised that his attempt to plant rice in normal soil worked, thus establishing the core life needs that any Asian would rely on. As such, he decided to make a rice paddy, which he prepared on his own before everyone in his village, before filling it to the brim with water. Some of the elves initially assumed that he's making a pond, while Leia assumed that Hiraku will put some fish there. However, Hiraku requested that they start walking in the paddy to plant rice there. After a bit of unintentional funny poses by elves in the paddy, the plantation went without hitches. To make sure that his paddy remained safe, Hiraku went as far as to put Zabuton's children to guard it from any pests, until the rice grew in a much faster rate than expected. With rice being ready to be harvested, Hiraku resorted to get help from Lai and the others to harvest it using a scythe, which they managed to do in the blink of an eye. The next step after cutting off the plants was to try them out from any moisture, before taking it to the house where they'll be threshed out, before getting rid of any remaining leaves, using a sieve, a mortar to remove husk from the rice, and a pestle to polish it. This was a time-consuming procedure, but to ruin Tia's disappointment, Hiraku was not done yet, because he was going to cook the rice now. After explaining the long process that I couldn't even comprehend, Hiraku tasked Ru with lighting up some fire to start cooking, which she did, after Hiraku made it clear that he didn't mean for her to blast the whole thing ablaze. Once the rice was cooked, Hiraku proceeded to make rice balls, which everyone took a liking to, especially Ru, who took notice of the presence of fish slices inside. Although he couldn't eat another rice ball, Hiraku was so happy that everyone else enjoyed them, which encouraged him to plant rice once again. Indeed, Hiraku and the elves went ahead with planting a new batch of rice in the paddy. Once their workday was over, the elves left the paddy and cleaned themselves through some Power Rangers poses, which made Hiraku begin contemplating making a proper bath, since he built a waterway that could be achievable. In only a matter of time, Hiraku brought up the idea of building a bath to the girls, where he explained the structure of how baths are built. Liu and the others were initially skeptical of getting a cold from it, only for Hiraku to answer them with the legendary "just trust me bro" argument. And so the construction began, where everything was made sure to be made right, especially the tub. Eventually, Hiraku noticed that he might have trouble with wastewater, which made Tia suggest that it could be solved with using slimes, since they eat a lot of waste products and purify them. Seeing that Hiraku didn't know the slimes of this world, Tia went ahead to bring some. Once she did, Hiraku showed it up to Zabuton and Kuro, who were too disgusted to eat it, which made Hiraku throw them in a water purification pool for that one purpose. Furthermore, Hiraku took Tia's advice to put slimes in the toilet to clean them up too, since they could purify feces as well. With the purification issue being dealt with, Hiraku went ahead to gather some firewood, where he found some mushrooms atop one of them. Since he had no way to tell how to distinguish safe from poisonous shrooms, and with other opinions not being too helpful, Hiraku used his omnipotent farming tool to grow some mushrooms atop some firewood, which weirded out by Kuro, until Hiraku realized that he totally forgot about the bath. That evening, Hiraku called the girls to teach them how to use the bath they finished constructing. For self-explanatory reasons, Leia suggested that Hiraku shows them how things are done, which he did. To Hiraku, he could finally experience something he was forbidden to ever do back when he was in hospital. After snapping back to reality, Hiraku told the girls that they can enjoy themselves with these instructions, which they carried on with immediately before he could even leave. Despite him addressing that as an issue, Ru argued that that's perfectly fine, and Taya backed her up on that, as she didn't want to warm up the water again. Unable to argue back for his own privacy's sake, Hiraku caved in embarrassment, and his loud thinking of making a private bath for himself made things even more mortifying for him. The following morning, Hiraku checked on the logs and was happy to see his mushrooms growing up. Furthermore, he was surprised to see the dogs bringing 5 new elves, namely Lafa, Lhasa, Lalasha, Lalu and Lami, which brought some deja vu conversation to Hiraku. Granted, they were also eager to join Hiraku's village, for the exact same reason that Leia and her relatives did. With Hiraku agreeing to host them and building a house for them, Tia suggested that the newly arrived elves also help in improving Hiraku's house. Although Hiraku was happy to see the Lafa elves happy to resettle once again, he wasn't sure how they could even reproduce to restore their lineage. Seeing this from afar, Kuro was impressed by his master getting more females around him. As for him, he spent his time alone in the woods since he was born, where he never lost a fight to any male dog. He thought he was unstoppable, until he met a female that bet him. Since then, Kuro traveled alongside that female dog, until one day he realized her stomach was growing big. As he was thinking that having children wouldn't be such a bad idea, their luck turned bad when they got attacked by a bear, for God knows why it left without finishing them off. Since then, the two were severely weakened. They were desperate for help, until they met up with Hiraku, who surprised them with his willingness to help them, despite being lonely and weak in these dangerous woods. Since then, the two were thankful to him for saving their lives, taking care of Yuki until she gave birth, and even giving them their names. Even if he was concerned that Hiraku still doesn't know that his specimens are the Inferno Wolves, Kuro decided to protect Hiraku with his life if push came to shove. A few days later, Hiraku and the ladies were impressed by how their new house turned out to be. If anything, Hiraku figured from Leia's instructions that the building he was working on would be good. But not this good. Ru and Tia also contributed in designing the building, much to Hiraku's surprise. Granted, the building was even more impressive on the inside as well, where the building was designed to make sure that everyone in the village so far can gather inside and do whatever they want. Moreover, Hiraku had his personal bedroom, a dining room, a kitchen, and a cellar, which will be used for storage. Seeing that everyone was excited by how their bedrooms turned out to be, Hiraku checked out his, which was initially blocked. Upon seeing that it had a bed for two, he closed it and pretended to see nothing. What he couldn't pretend not to see, however, was the big tree at the front gate of the building, which was an amazing scene. Furthermore, Hiraku placed statues of one of his dogs in addition to that of his god at the front gate of the building. With all his ingredients being prepared for lunch, Ru and Tia came back from work hungry. In fact, Hiraku was planning on making curry for them, which in his own account is very easy to make. Ironically, Ru and Tia got terrified after assuming that Hiraku's usage of Ru will mean that he'll use her in person as an ingredient. It only took them seeing Ru in the fields to have the misunderstanding being cleared. Although these plants shouldn't grow in areas where it snows, his omnipotent farming tool came in clutch to make him grow whatever he wants. When it came to harvesting, Hiraku got the girls to help him out with cumin and turmeric, which required so much drying from the girls. Then came the coriander, cilantro, which the dogs didn't like the way it smelled at all, while giving Tia and Ru food for thought on how to deal with Inferno Wolves. Anyway, Hiraku mentioned that the last spices needed will be black pepper and cayenne peppers, before heading back to the kitchen. Surprisingly, he thought that girls would consider guys making spices before cooking to be a tough nut to crack. Nevertheless, Hiraku went ahead in making his curry, with Leia as his assistant, because Ru and Tia went for some research to make a powerful protection talisman. Whatever that talisman may be, Hiraku began his preparation for his cooking content on TikTok, which even made him unintentionally riz Lei, as well as the attention of Lise, Likot, and two dogs. After letting the dish cook, Hiraku remembered that he completely forgot about one important ingredient, which is naan. Since it was Indian bread, Hiraku thought of how many portions he needed to make for everyone in the house, before proceeding to make it instead of rice. While they were at it, Ru and Tia arrived and caught up with the gathering elves around the outer kitchen, which reminded them of how hungry they actually were. Fortunately for them, Hiraku and Leia were done with cooking already. That evening, everyone gathered around to taste this new invention called curry, which after being shown how to eat it, everyone loved it. So much so that everyone went ahead to get more curry on their own initiative, thus making Hiraku beg them to leave him some. After Ru and Tia made sure that the dogs could never get close to curry, thanks to the way it smelled, and after everyone became so full from curry, Hiraku kept on cleaning the curry sauce with bread. Since winter was coming, everyone began preparing all the provisions they would need, from firewood to potatoes for Zabuton, who also provided Hiraku with blankets. The elves were also working around the clock to make sure that their forgery was finished, while Ru and Tia were preserving some meat by seasoning, smoking, and drying it, because it will be given to the dogs during the winter. Simultaneously, Hiraku was also working on a new way to preserve veggies, by putting them in boxes covered with sheets and letting the snow do the rest, which will serve as a makeshift refrigerator. Seeing that Ru was performing magic, Hiraku tried performing something similar, which ended as you might expect. That night, Ru informed Hiraku that he needs to learn how to use magic if he wants to use even the most basic of spells. Although he couldn't perform any basic task himself, Hiraku couldn't help but express how impressed he was by everyone else's magical skills. In response, Ru also pointed out that everyone else in the house is in awe of Hiraku's farming skills, which is something they don't have. Before everybody knew it, winter had arrived, and snow began to pile up. For the most part, Hiraku, just like everyone else, stayed indoors where they did a variety of different activities for fun, such as Hiraku making different sets of classic reverse-it, chess and mahjong pieces. Granted, Hiraku also explained how reverse is actually played, which seemed incredibly easy for the girls there, until Ru decided to challenge Tia in a game of reverse it, thus starting another fight between the two since the truce they had upon arriving at the farm. Seeing that she had very little chance of winning, Ru took the literal approach of turning the table on her opponent. However, Tia restored everything to how it was, much to Ru's chagrin, which resulted in a back-and-forth argument between the two. While Hiraku left the room to let them do whatever they wanted, To his surprise, Hiraku discovered that even his dogs were able to learn how to play chess correctly, which intimidated Hiraku to the point he decided to not challenge them in any game. Speaking of which, Ryu tried to challenge the victor dog in a game of chess, only to get PTSD from how humiliating the loss was. Eventually, Hiraku decided to challenge Kuro, Tia and Leia to a game of mahjong, since he assumed that none are able to understand its rules that well yet. All seemed to go well at first, when he realized that he lost to a dog no less, which made him sit next to Ryu in their PTSD bench. The following day, Hiraku decided to play some bowling in the building's hall. Although he managed to mark 8 points out of 10, the other 2 pins are left in a position where it's difficult to take down. Despite that, Hiraku nailed the next shot, which impressed everyone else. However, his impressive feat was immediately shattered when Ryu achieved a strike. Nevertheless, that didn't stop the house's residents from enjoying their time playing games, chilling and eating some good food, until the winter was over. With snow finally melted, Hiraku left the house to see the beautiful and warm spring sky. With Tia and Ryo following suit, Hiraku thought it best to finish planting crops as soon as possible. Just as he was expecting Zabuton to wake up shortly after, the latter rang the danger bell, which alerted Hiraku to react. This time, the incoming threat is a flying wyvern. Seeing that the wyvern was about to attack, Ryo and Tia set up a defensive spell, which barely repelled the incoming attack. Seeing that the elves were in disarray, Hiraku decided to pull out a defense of his own, which resulted in his omnipotent farming tool turning into a spear that he threw it with all his might, so much so that it pierced through the monster's shield and its corpse. Although there was some damage to the crop fields, the building was fine, but even more importantly, everyone there was in awe of what Hiraku pulled off. After checking on the monster's corpse, Ryu pointed out that coming across a wyvern this big is a rare occurrence. Tia also added that there's little to no chance that a wyvern this size could be dispatched by someone intending to harm them. Hearing this, Hiraku dismissed the whole spiel as an unfortunate accident, before asking if the wyvern is edible. The next thing he knew was himself cooking wyvern meat that very evening, which was described to be a luxury in this world. Eventually, he gave grilled wyvern steak to the ladies as well as other dishes that were made out of the same type of meat. While everyone was enjoying their meal, Ryu and Tia discussed their own ability to fend off Hiraku's spear, before relaying to Hiraku about how blessed they were for running into him in the woods. Elsewhere, at the Demon Lord's castle, 3 of the great generals, Chrome, I'm not kidding that's his name, as well as Randon and Gratz, the defeat of the wyvern had sent a shockwave through all the nearby kingdoms. Meanwhile, what concerns Hikaru the most is one missing thing for his next wyvern meat meal, which is now about time to start making it. That's right, it's alcohol. To make that, the elves began harvesting grapes, which will be squashed and let them ferment. As for the squashing process, it'll be done in a massive container with the girls' feet, while Hiraku will switch barrels after they get filled with wine. Fortunately for him, Lalasha had great expertise in making barrels. The squashing did not begin well initially, especially with the girls bumping into one another. However, things significantly improved when they came to a decision to move in a synchronized manner set by a song that the elves used to sing in their village long ago, before rumor forced Hiraku to join them in the fun. That evening, everyone was done with squashing grapes, which resulted in 16 barrels full to the brim. Although he thought that they've made way too much, the girls assured him that they'll drink it all. Seeing how much fun Hiraku and the girls were having, the god that reincarnated him built his case before the goddess of agriculture, who still refused to forgive him for his recklessness, as he punished an innocent soul, reincarnated him in the most dangerous location possible, and even gave him a replica of the Holy Lance Grime, which Hiraku was still using it as a farming tool for the time being. Although it was so energy draining that it could have eliminated Hiraku himself, the god assured the goddess of agriculture that his recovery is what will keep him fine. Despite that, the latter was dismayed by the former's negligence, as well as Hiraku representing her as an old man, which made the goddess of agriculture punish her father to sit on his knees like that for the next 3 millennia. The next morning, Zabuton rang the bell again, which made Hiraku rush to see what was going on. This time, he was surprised to see an elf girl tied up. While Hiraku was lost in his deja vu, Ryu identified the young girl as her younger sister, Flora, who followed her all the way here after learning that Ryu was being chased by some black-hearted woman. Although she agreed to Hiraku's request to stay here for a while, Flora was skeptical that Hiraku is her brother-in-law, only for Kuro to force that idea out of her head with one glance. With Ryu reminding her sister of Hiraku's portfolio, Flora begged Hiraku to forgive her rude behavior. More importantly for Hiraku, he finally realized that Kuro is a wolf, where the inferno part was outright flexed before him. That night, Flora was given a huge meal to compensate her for what Kuro and the wolves had done, which she found as enjoyable as intriguing as it was, especially the tofu and the miso soup. While he was talking about the cooking process of the dish, Flora began to note the chemical reactions and organisms in this dish, which impressed Hiraku, while annoying Ru, who pointed out that she should either eat or talk before rushing out of the farm the following day in great excitement. A month later, Flora returned, with a horde of maids with her, who were led by Anne, who requested that they serve Hiraku as he saw fit. Furthermore, the maids brought under Flora's instructions some cows alongside them, which delighted Hiraku. On the other hand, was horrified after realizing that she's the only angel in this ever-growing village, which made her request to leave the village for a short while. After the cows got PTSD from being stared at by the wolves, Tia returned that same evening, with a horde of underlings to flex, namely Granaria, Kudel, Koron, and Daga, who brought some chicken jockey along too, which delighted Hikaru greatly, as he now has access to eggs from chickens, as well as dairy products from cow's milk. Granted, Hikaru was so delighted that this place became so lively and more civilized. Eventually, Hikaru noticed that the maids brought by Flora were ogres, who despite their superb cleaning skills, were not eating complicated dishes, which made Hikaru teach the maids a variety of cooking techniques, which caught their interest, which made them show a bit of too much power, on top of their proper manners. As for the angels, they were commanded by Tia to patrol the perimeter of the village to ensure its safety. The lizard men were also performing their duties in labor-intensive work. While he was thinking of a way to tell the lizard men apart from one another, Leah arrived to tell Hiraku that she managed to gather all the elves in the woods, who were all women, because there were no men who survived the ordeal. Despite him wishing the elves the best to reproduce, Hiraku didn't ask how that would even happen, for self-explanatory reasons. A few days later, the representatives of each race were summoned to help Hiraku find a name for this place. After all, the farm expanded from merely being a tiny one with Hiraku living in a hut, to a village in its own right. Granted, naming it after himself was out of the question, and then requested that the village be named after the forest's name, which was also rejected for obvious reasons. Eventually, Hiraku agreed to Zabuton's suggestion to name the village as the Great Tree Village, which was celebrated in a great party that same night, where Hiraku was declared as the village's mayor. With everyone getting drunk, Hiraku sat next to Tia after being called to do so. For him, he was so happy that all this felt like a dream coming true, to which Tia assured him that this is reality, and that everyone will make sure that they'll maintain this reality and enjoy living happily together. Despite becoming a mayor, his daily routine hasn't changed in the slightest, or so he thought, as he ended up receiving a messenger from the demonic kingdom. His messenger was Beezle, who immediately requested an audience with the person in charge. Upon Hiraku introducing himself, Beezle delivered a gift from the Demon Lord himself, before stating that he came in to discuss his status of settlement here. Although he was worried that he might end up becoming a puppet for the Demon Lord and send him a yearly tribute per se, Hiraku, after getting assured that he got this by Rimuru, offered that he'd be willing to send 10% of his harvest to the Demon Lord to ensure that he could stay in this land. Seeing that Beezle was taken aback by this, Hiraku got worried too that might have been too low. But Beezle surprised him even more by accepting this daily and that the tribute will be collected before every winter, with the exception of milk, eggs, honey, and alcohol. Once the agreement was signed, Beezle dipped out of the village. To Ru, this is a good deal, as the village has now become under the protection of the Demon Lord from any aggression. If anything, Anne argued that they came off with a too good to be true deal, as the Demon Lord requested anywhere from 50 to 60% of harvests from his subjects. Nevertheless, there's no way for the Demon Lord to tell the accuracy of everything they have produced so far. Furthermore, Ru was more excited about the gift they received, which is an elixir that would heal anyone that drinks it or apply it to an injury. That night, Gratz was surprised that the Great Tree Village had submitted to their military power without a fight, and Randon thought that there must be some sort of a motive behind that. However, Beezle revealed that both Ru and Tia were there, who were known for being notoriously strong, as well as a horde of elves, infernal wolves, and even other angels being there as well, which forced Beezle to take on their deal hastily. Hearing this, Randon joined Beezle in his worries. Gratz, however, was skeptical, and proceeded to open the box that Hiraku gifted them, which contained some apples. As he ate one of the apples, the generals discovered that the handkerchief gifted to them was made out of the fabric of a notoriously powerful spider, which further horrified them to the point that Randon decided to resign. The following day, Grime and Gucci came to the Great Tree Village with a present of their own, which was a prestigious sword of some sort. After introducing his lord, as well as the reasoning of their visit, which was to greet them as their southern neighbors, to Hiraku's surprise, Drime had a human form, which he switched to make sure he can see eye to eye with Hiraku. That night, Drime had a blast while drinking with Hiraku to the point he decided he wouldn't head back home. but Gucci argued against that. After thanking their hosts for their hospitality, Drime and Gucci left the village, leaving Hiraku behind, thinking about how he can deal with diplomatic relations. After giving it some thought, Hiraku decided to build a guest house for visitors that would be enough to host 4 people. However, Lua argued to make it bigger. After all, their guests for now were a few representatives of dragons and demon lords, but who knows if there'll ever be even more guests coming. Moreover, any other guests would likely have to cross the mountains, which will make their journey incredibly exhausting. As such, it was decided that a house that can fit up to 30 people should be built. Granted, the work on the building began almost immediately. Simultaneously, Hiraku thought it best to work on receiving his guests by signing the angels and lizardmen to defend the perimeter. To make sure that guests' arrival would be instantly distinguished, Hiraku taught Zabuton a new signal for that purpose. As for the reception, Anne and Daga argued that it'd be best to have more representatives to host their guests at the gate of the village. Flora was also included, but was also tasked with keeping an eye on visitors who stayed in the village until nightfall. With everything set in stone, the villagers found their preparations put to the test not too long after, as their guests were 5 humanoids led by someone called Graft, who came from the Howling Village. Before Hiraku could do anything, Rue decided to greet the guests this time before taking them to the guest house. However, she made it clear that she'll only treat the 5 of them as guests, while anyone else outside the village is an enemy, which made Graft abide by their rules. After hosting their guests in their room, Tia locked them in, as she suspected that they might be up to something nasty, especially since they didn't bring any gifts to show their goodwill. Surprisingly, Tia also admitted that the other angels have misjudged the situation, which she'll punish them for later. Even Anne wasn't eager to show great hospitality to these guests, as she was going to give them a subpar dinner compared to what was given to Drime, for the exact same reasoning as Tia and Rue. Although Hiraku felt bad about serving some meager food for his guests, Tia and Rue assured him that emotions are no good in this case. After all, their goal is to figure out what they're after, and offering the guests alcohol was something they were forced to do. As he wanted to know their reason for their visit, Hiraku decided to ask Graft more about the place they came from. He learned that it's a small village made of 5 small settlements where most of their villagers are beastmen who live off of mining and hunting. Since their only trading route with other humans from a certain village got disturbed recently, they were forced to search for someone new to trade with. Eventually, their search for a new trade partner led them to the Great Tree Village, which they learned about from the Demon Lord. The more Tia then proceeded to get information from the Beastmen, the more it became evident that they were overly cautious and had no intentions of playing tricks on them. As the two were discussing a trade agreement the following day, however, Hiraku came to the realization of establishing a currency. Moreover, it became clear that Hiraku needs to facilitate trading with them by establishing a land route, especially since the woods are too difficult to navigate. Aside from that, the two agreed to trade goods from the Beastmen in exchange for food crops from the Great Tree. Before they left the village, Graft apologized for not bringing any gifts during their visit, since that wasn't a common practice among them in the first place. But Hiraku didn't mind that. In only a matter of time, trade with the Howling Village was about to start. Hiraku thought of making it there, but rumor argued against it, before Tia mentioned that everyone had agreed that Tia would do so on his behalf. More good news came when Drime, who became a regular at the Great Tree Village, agreed to take everyone to the Howling Village in exchange for a barrel of wine. At the latter village, everyone there was worried that the deal would be for naught, only to be surprised that Tia and the others had arrived atop a dragon. Upon returning to their village a few days later, Tia reported that everything went smoothly there, and that the Beastmen loved the gifts they received, as well as selling the wine barrel that was meant to be for Drime, thus explaining his doom and gloom. Before Hiraku offered that he'll let him drink even more at his place tonight, which delighted Drime. Furthermore, Tia added that about 20 of the Beastmen race would also love to resettle inside the Great Tree Village, to which Hiraku agreed to, as long as they send at the very least 2 young men. Before long, the Beastmen ladies arrived, and Hiraku assured them that they'll be in good care here as long as they make themselves feel comfortable there. On the other hand, the ladies brought 3 young Beastmen, namely Gol, Sil, and Bron. Perhaps a bit too young. Nevertheless, Hiraku thought that he might rely on them more in the next 5 or 10 years. As for the ladies, Hiraku left them in Ramurias's care. Fortunately for Hiraku, the worry that the girls felt from any mistreatment had completely subsided, as they began to quickly enjoy themselves. According to Ramurias, albeit they would faint the moment they came across Zabuton and Kuro. Granted, Senna took care of the boys as well by using magic, which prevents him from falling to the ground. Seeing this, Hiraku began to wonder if he was the only magicless person in the village. In response, Leia mentioned that everyone there could use fire and water magic, including Zabuton, Kuro, the Queen Bee, and even slimes. Despite that, Hiraku thought it best to focus on what he could do for now. While he was working peacefully, Hiraku felt a massive shake in the earth, which was reported to be from a bear and a viper fighting. Although Grammaria wanted to intervene to stop any further worry to be caused to the villagers, it would be too dangerous to do so. However, Hiraku had another approach, which led directly to his stomach. In only a matter of time, Grammaria took Hiraku to where the two monsters were fighting, where each one would be one-shot by Hiraku. Eventually, the bear and snake were brought by the villagers, where Hiraku had a very good idea on how to cook them. Starting with a wine-grazed grappler bear and a chicken-fried bloody viper. And don't ask me how a viper dish could be called chicken-fried. Be that as it may, Hiraku and everyone else found the dishes to be incredibly tasty. Despite that, Hiraku went to check if Flora could make some antibacterial herbals, which will prevent any stomach aches and all, which she did. Unfortunately for Flora, her progress in miso soup wasn't going well, as she failed at it to the point she had to rebuild her hut 3 times. Hearing this, Hiraku agreed to help her out. The following morning, Hiraku brought the necessary ingredients to show Flora how to make mayonnaise. Although it could be tasty, Hiraku advised Flora not to chug it all up, as that's unhealthy. With that out of the way, Hiraku taught the younger vampire how to make miso soup, before proceeding to store the tofu that they had made in the cellar to age for the next few months. While they were at it, Ryu came in to inform Hiraku to inform him that he had visitors. This time his guests were dwarves, who were led by Donovan, who came in to have their wine. Although he had no money, Donovan suggested he pay them with technology instead, which could be used to turn their wheat into fine alcohol too. As they demonstrated how their technology worked and how strong the new liquor was, Hiraku decided to host a party in celebration of having the beastmen and dwarves as the new villagers of this new village, where everyone enjoyed themselves at it, especially Drime, who snuck his way in and enjoyed drinking to his heart's content. While Gucci took his drunk master outside, Donovan thanked Hiraku for allowing them in. However, seeing that he finally got some grown men in his village, Hiraku thought of addressing the issue indirectly to Donovan, only for the latter to reveal that he's into women with beards. The following morning, the village was threatened by a dragon, which was repelled by Drime before Hiraku could even react. Seeing that a third dragon appeared, however, Hiraku threw his spear at it, and he could have thrown another one at it, hadn't Gucci prevented that from happening. As it turned out, the 3 dragons were Drime, his wife Grafaloon, and his daughter Lustus Moon, who came in to see where Drime had been sneaking off to every night for the past few days. While Hiraku built a house specifically for Drime to make sure he doesn't come back home drunk, the latter portrayed that his visits were to ensure high-level politics with the village, which after getting frightened by his wife briefly, Grafaloon was relieved that her husband had no affair there. Eventually, Hiraku and the ladies apologized to one another for the misunderstanding, before Hiraku went on with his business. As for Drime, he managed to get his point across with his wife, who realized how powerful Hiraku was firsthand, where Grafaloon was saved by Zabuton. As such, it was decided that Lustus Moon lives here for a while, to make sure that such power can never be used against a dragon. Granted, she did that in the most diplomatic way possible. No cap. As for Hiraku, it's the same good old deja vu. However, Lustus Moon turned out to be less delicate compared to everyone else, as her strength was a bit out of control. Hiraku was aware of that, but he was trying to keep his word to Drime to get his daughter some chores to do. Worse yet, the cows, chickens, and even the notorious Inferno wolves were all scared since the dragon's arrival. After figuring out that the dragons possess such great and overwhelming wisdom, Lustus Moon was placed in charge of diplomatic relations, which worked wonders in making Beazle accept their conditions without arguing at all. Granted, the news of the village recruiting Lustus Moon reached the Demon Lord's castle, which made them panic for a moment, until Beazle argued that he had a solution. The following morning, he summoned his daughter Froerum to join the village for intels, while also making sure she maintains her safety, which she agreed to instantly. Upon seeing things from afar, Froerum was horrified by the fact that a village like this exists in one of the most notorious places in their realm, before moving to introduce herself to Lustus Moon and her purpose of being there, which made Froerum wonder why such a legendary dragon would be here bragging about crops. As the dragon girl went to check on some reported guests that came out, Froerum thought it best to analyze the village's military strength, where she took notice of their power, as well as some contradictions there, such as Rue and Tia coexisting in the same village. The more she investigated the village, the more Froerum began to realize that the Demon Lord's army was nowhere close to matching the Great Tree's village army. Even her skills as the most gifted mage in the Demon Lord's army can't compensate for what they're lacking. Despite that, Froerum realized that there's still someone who's even higher in rank in this village than Lustus Moon, which speaks of the devil. Here comes the hot stepper, Hiraku himself. Eventually, she identified that he was the mayor of the village from Lustus Moon herself. Eventually, Froerum's identity was figured out by Hiraku, which was no issue whatsoever for him, especially since she was getting along well with Lustus Moon. The following day, the slime that Tia brought to purify the waters had split into more slimes with more colors. It didn't seem troublesome initially, until everyone realized that the red slime had absorbed every drop of wine they had, which infuriated the girls there. to the point they had their first trial, which concluded in the slime being declared guilty. Instead of outright eliminating it, however, Hiraku decided the slime should be confined in a small pot, which resulted in the slime escaping it directly. Seeing how chaotic things were getting, Fraurim argued that the best possible punishment for a slime is to expel it from the village, even if that would sadden Hiraku a little. It's now autumn, and Hiraku is relieved that through a bit more work, they'll be able to get everything needed for the incoming winter. Before he knew it, Hiraku found himself hungry, as he went to eat with everyone else, some hot pot, which had some of the new mushrooms he planted. However, he couldn't help but wish they'd have some seafood to eat too. After identifying what seafood is to Leia, Rue and Flora started searching for those creatures immediately. Tia was the only one who encountered crabs, which were colossal in size in this world, and lethal on top of that. Eventually, the girls began to learn about what type of dishes could be made with the variety of sea creatures they'll be capturing, such as chanko fishes. Hearing this, Fraurim pointed out that there's a port city within the boundaries of the demonic kingdom, which they could reach by heading straight south, which made her, Daga, and Lastus Moon head immediately to capture the chanko fish. On the other hand, Hiraku couldn't be happier to see everyone getting happy from enjoying his food. 3 days later, the girls returned, with Michael Goran, president of the Goran Company, for negotiations with Hiraku in person. Naturally, Michael brought fish that his fishermen often throw back in the ocean, before assuring Hiraku that he'll make sure that more of these fish will be dried up and sent to him. Granted, Michael had 3 goals from this visit. The first was to properly greeting Hiraku, the second to suggest more opportunities for trading, and lastly, to become the official government purveyor of this village. His directness took Tia there by surprise, but also excited Ruan when it came to exposing their goods to even more people. That evening, Michael was done covering the important goods that they got. After getting the fright of his life from Lastus Moon at the very thought of trading alcohol, Michael got escorted out of the city. As he did, Hiraku, Rue, and Tia were hopeful that their deal with Michael would be fruitful for them both. As for Michael himself, he was outright terrified by the presence of such powerful individuals there. 3 days earlier, Michael got notified that he's having a visitor that wants to talk business with him. Although he was busy, Michael was surprised by how surprised his guests were to see him, especially that they wanted to show him their goods. He was about to reject them initially, but then his guts made him change his mind. Before he knew it, Fraurim, Lastus Moon, and Daga came in. The former's presence initially took Michael by surprise, as he was relieved in a way that he didn't turn her away, but even more so was Lastus Moon, which made him worry that trading with them would be a risky affair. Nevertheless, he went ahead to see the goods that they were going to sell him. Although he was worried initially, he was surprised to see that they're going to sell him apples and other rare fruits in this kingdom. This made him realize that the profits outweigh the risk in this case, thus declaring that he's willing to provide the girls with anything they need and even rushing his assistant to do so. As he learned that he'll be really heading to the Forest of Death, it was too late for him to have second thoughts, as he was taken to meet up with Dryme and his wife, before getting welcomed by Tia, the angels, Kuro, and Zabuton in the village itself, let alone Rue. Nevertheless, Michael could finally breathe a huge sigh of relief that this spiel is over for now, especially that he struck one of the best deals of his life. That night, everyone enjoyed the new hot pot, which was made out of seafood this time, before Hiraku began to think that he'll order shrimps or squids next time from Michael. The following day, Hiraku realized that they might be getting attacked by another dragon. This time he wasn't sure if it was related to Dryme or not, especially since it had overpowered the 3 angels. Seeing that it started attacking, Hiraku threw 2 spears at the dragon, which resulted in the second spearing it down. Upon inspecting the dragon, Hiraku and the wolves found themselves before a girl who had voluntarily surrendered. Before he knew it, Hiraku saw Dryme arriving to defend her. It turned out that Hakuren, the girl, is Dryme's older sister. According to Hakuren, she did what she did because Dryme was offering Lastus Moon as a bride to Hiraku, which he definitely did during his drunken fits. As such, Hakuren argued that she came to see who that lucky guy might be, and definitely not to vent some anger, as Dryme pointed out. As he was finally fed up with Hakuren's tantrum, Hiraku finally made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate any more trouble caused on his turf. After getting Hakuren to repair the damages she caused, Hakuren got to argue with her brother about how he was enjoying the food in this village. While Hiraku was surprised by how fast she got herself in, Lastus Moon apologized to him for her aunt being a piece of work, but Hiraku didn't mind that at all. Before he knew it, Hakuren addressed him to get them to play some mahjong together. After insisting that she can figure out the rules eventually, she decided to make a bet. When asked about that, Hiraku figured that he had nothing to bet on, so he argued to punish the loser. Although he didn't want to get anyone to do something they didn't wanna, the Dryme family was all on board with Dryme. As the game went on, the tense atmosphere and competitiveness of the dragons had overwhelmed him to the point he began to have second thoughts, especially since he lost every bit of clothes, save for his underwear. Seeing that he finally got the perfect set to play, Hiraku began to think that he could finally end the whole game with a single strike. After encouraging himself to play a certain piece, he realized that he lost the game and his pants. At the Demon Lord's castle, Beazle informed Gratz and Landon about the dragons gathering in the Great Tree Village, which made them concerned that they had finally gotten enough strength to conquer a country. While the Demon Lord himself, Galgardo, was talking about how his daughter had been in a very bad mood since the morning. Gratz argued that it's best to mobilize the army immediately, but Danlan offered his resignation. The following morning, Hiraku and Lostisman were impressed to see Hakuran teaching kids. Since she decided to stay in the village for the time being, Hakuran even got the time to make some beautiful statues with cut-and apples. But that was boring for her. Not wanting to keep on doing anything physical, it was decided that teaching the kids of this village. Aside from that, mermaids came to the village to establish diplomatic relationships with Hiraku, as they brought gifts in exchange for their lives being spared. According to their Lamia girls, the younger wolves and spiders decided to clear their dungeon, which resulted in them wreaking havoc in their turf. After talking this out briefly with Freyorim, it was decided to agree to their demand, as well as striking a trade deal with them, which made the mermaids very happy, that it made Hiraku feel awkward. Granted, he also asked them if they could put on some clothes in their next visits to the village, which resulted in them at least putting on enough to cover the twin hills each of them had. Eventually, Hiraku was very happy that they became very reliable neighbors. Seeing that his village is starting to reach a new level, Hiraku thought it best to plant some more crops. That night, 3 ladies from the Demon Lord's castle assumed that the village was amassing troops for an invasion, and that they're keeping Fralrem as a hostage, which convinced Princess Yurine to issue a rescue operation for their friend. A while later, 3 demon girls inform Princess Yuri about the village's rapid expansion. This makes her suspicious, and she becomes convinced that Hiraku has naughty intentions toward Florem. Determined to rescue her, Yuri begins planning an attack. A few nights later, Beazle visits Florem in her office. She initially brushes him off, saying she's too busy, until he brings up Yuri's plan to wage war on the village. Shocked, Florem jokingly asks if the princess has lost her mind. Beazle explains that Rosalind, Roju and Klakas have been feeding Yuri false information about the village. When Florem questions whether Yuri has even read her reports about the village's overwhelming strength, Beazle clarifies that Yuri believes those reports are forced and fabricated because it seems impossible for a simple farming village to house so many powerful beings. Worried, Beazle begs Florem to stop Yuri's invasion before it leads to disaster, especially since the Demon King is too preoccupied with pleasing Yuri to intervene. The next day, Yuri's army of 300 demon soldiers is immediately overwhelmed when the Lamias block their path and nearly crush them with trees. Within minutes, Florem presents them to Hiraku as harmless newcomers seeking shelter. When Hiraku notices how terrified they look, Florem tells him not to worry and assures him she'll turn them into productive members of society. Confused by Yuri floating on a throne with no one carrying it, Hiraku questions it, but Florem tells him to ignore it and treat her like any other villager. After Hiraku leaves, Florem warns the group to behave and keep their failed attack a secret. She also makes it clear they won't receive special treatment and might even end up as food for Kuro and the other dogs if Tia and Lu discover the truth. The girls agree, and Florem begins giving them a tour of the village. However, the 3 troublemakers nearly expose themselves when they openly discuss taking over the village while casually eating apples. Later, they attempt to escape, hoping to return to the demon capital without consequences. But after being caught multiple times by Kuro's pack and Zabuton, they give up and accept their new roles as town hall workers. A few days later, Florem takes Yuri out to play with some puppies. While distracting them with a thrown disc, Yuri apologizes for her earlier actions, admitting she didn't realize such a powerful village could be so peaceful. When Florem asks why her father didn't intervene, Yuri becomes emotional and explains she felt left out, believing Florem had stopped treating her like a close friend. She also admits her actions were driven by the belief that Hiraku was holding Florem hostage. Florem apologizes for not keeping her informed and promises to do better. Later, Hiraku and Florem notice that the 3 former troublemakers are actually enjoying their new lives as assistants. As they relax, Lu arrives, frustrated because her transformation magic hasn't been working properly. Several days pass, and Yuri becomes more involved in farm work. When the others remind her of her royal status, she ends up making them work alongside her. Eventually, she decides to return home, thanking Hiraku for his hospitality. When Rosalind and the others hesitate to leave due to unfinished work, Yuri allows them to stay, but asks Florem to visit her sometime. Back in the Demon Kingdom, Galgardo summons Beazle, confused by Yuri's sudden change in behavior, especially since she no longer spends time with him as before. Beetle suggests she matured during her visit, but Galgardo becomes convinced that a man is behind her transformation. After calming down, he reluctantly agrees to listen to advice. Meanwhile, Hiraku and the villagers finish harvesting crops in preparation for winter, only to realize they have far more food than they can store. Hiraku decides to distribute the surplus. One suggestion is to send some to Hakuren's parents in the north, who turn out to be the Dragon Emperor and his wife. Lu volunteers to handle most of the deliveries. The next day she sets out, delivering supplies to various places including a port town where she meets Michael, who asks for help dealing with a troublesome sea monster affecting trade. At the same time, Hakuren brings food to her parents and while returning, comes across a group of starving dark elves in the forest. She leads them back to Hiraku, where their leader explains that they were no longer able to survive in the mountains. Hearing this, Hiraku permits them to settle in the village. Although the initial offer is to hunt on their behalf, her poor skills nearly cost her life, forcing her to acknowledge her shortcomings. Hiraku comforts her, and she decides to contribute in another way by gathering clay, a skill she has refined over the years. Soon after, Leia and the elves discover a dungeon deep in the forest and go to explore it. Concerned, Hiraku sends wolves to protect them. Meanwhile, he finally tries to enjoy a peaceful bath, only to have it interrupted by energetic beast children. Later, Florim catches Rosalind and the others attempting to sneak into the bath area with beastmen. She harshly reminds them how weak they are compared to the powerful women in the village, warning them not to cause trouble. Several days later, Leia and the elves return from the dungeon and report encountering a dangerous viper. She explains that the meat of this viper can boost fertility among elves, making it extremely valuable, especially with winter drawing near. About a week later, Hiraku begins preparing for what comes next. He decides to check on Lu, only to find Sena and Tia already attending to her. Worried, he asks if she's feeling alright. Lu reassures him that it's nothing serious, just a bit of nausea. Sena then asks if Lu has been craving any unusual fruits lately. Lu admits she has mostly been eating fruits, which makes Hiraku uneasy, but Sena quickly puts him at ease by revealing that it's actually good news. She hints that their late-night efforts have finally paid off. Months later, Hiraku wakes up expecting another normal day on the farm. However, this time, Lu steps outside with an enormous belly. Startled, he asks if she's okay, but she casually tells him not to worry. He recalls how excited the entire village had been when they learned about her pregnancy, as well as how calm and unfazed she remained throughout it all, despite being the one who originally built the so-called love room. After a short conversation with her, Hiraku heads into the kitchen to check on Anne and the other maids. Recently they have been waking up earlier than necessary, sacrificing their rest just to be up before him. While reviewing their breakfast preparations, Anne reports that the wine-loving slime has struck again, sneaking into the cellar and finishing yet another barrel. Hiraku reminds her that they deliberately leave one barrel out to keep it distracted from the main supply. Shortly afterward, breakfast is served to Hiraku and the main representatives of each race in the village, since the dining hall can no longer hold everyone at once. As they eat, they exchange updates on various matters around the village. Later on, the rest of the villagers come in for their meal, though Harukin ends up missing it entirely due to her irregular sleep schedule. Not long after, Gran Maria arrives with news about a group of monster rabbits that attempted to sneak into the village the previous day, only to be swiftly dealt with by Kuro's pups. Hiraku initially responds with excitement, seeing it as an opportunity for more meat, but Maria's serious expression makes him realize that the guards take their duties far more seriously than he does. Ironically, once they're off duty, they transform into incredibly lazy individuals, lounging around like sloths and even making the lizardmen handle their chores just so they can rest until the next battle. Once breakfast concludes, Hiraku heads out to tend to the farm. He starts by checking for the tiny black pests that often devour the crops, but thankfully, his farming tool's watering function includes a built-in monster repellent. He spends most of the morning working the fields, eventually pausing to admire the peaceful scenery he's cultivated before taking a lunch break. In the beginning, the villagers were astonished by the idea of eating 3 meals a day, so it took time for them to adjust. The elves in particular were shocked, as they were used to surviving on just a single meal. Meanwhile, Sena and the Beast Girls were initially frightened, thinking that Hiraku's generosity meant he planned to drive them out, since such luxury was unheard of in their previous lives. After lunch, Hiraku returns to the fields and decides to plant flowers to add some color and vibrancy to the village. Later, he spends some time crafting small items for the girls' enjoyment, eventually stumbling upon them training rigorously to burn off the extra calories from their improved diet. Not wanting to feel left out, he joins them, but after only a few minutes, he's already out of breath and gives up, choosing instead to rely on his one reliable skill. As evening sets in, Anne introduces a new dish to the dinner menu. After taking a look at it, Hiraku bluntly tells her to focus on preparing food that's actually edible. Despite this, she insists that everyone must eat it no matter how bad it tastes. When the others gather for dinner, Cromwell hands Hiraku a letter from Yuri, asking for more fruit and clothes made by Zabuton. After struggling through the unpleasant meal, Hiraku heads to the bath, finally enjoying some quiet time alone. Later, while returning to his room, he notices that the others are secretly watching him. Deciding to play along, he pretends not to notice at first. However, once he's inside, he realizes they're still spying on him, so he acts like he's in trouble just to expose them. The next day, Hiraku goes to spend time with the dwarves, expecting to find them half drunk while happily brewing more alcohol. Instead, he discovers that they take their work even more seriously than the angels. They explain that none of them drink while on duty, and Donovan even requests that their grape production be tripled. Hiraku then heads to the farm to figure out how to meet this demand. At that moment, Seino arrives and informs him about a mysterious man who has suddenly appeared in the village. Hiraku quickly makes his way to the great tree, puzzled about how the stranger managed to get past Zabuton and the angels. When Lou arrives and recognizes the man, Vargreif enthusiastically greets her before going inside with Hiraku to talk. As he begins explaining how happy he was to hear about Lou's pregnancy, Hiraku asks who he is. Lou then clarifies that he is essentially the grandfather of all vampires. Vargreif goes on to say that he originally intended to simply observe the village and leave, but the statue of God caught his attention because they had met just before his birth. He also reveals that being over 4,000 years old, he regularly erases parts of his memory to maintain his sanity, which is why Hiraku's statue intrigued him so much. After explaining how he has spent years trying to get a perfect statue like the one outside, he begs Hiraku for it and promises to pay whatever he asks, but Hiraku refuses and offers to make him a new one instead. Days later, Vargreif wraps up his new statue and asks Hiraku if he is really sure about not taking any payment. And after Hiraku insists that it's no problem, he wishes them luck with the pregnancy and heads out. Shortly after this, he arrives at the central church and catches up with the abbot in charge, before swapping out their old god statue for the new one. A few days later, Lou receives an elegant piano as a gift from Vargreif. After spending most of the day playing it, Rosalind and the others quietly sneak in, eager to try it themselves. However, once they open it, they become afraid of damaging such a valuable instrument and instead ask for a simpler piano they can practice on. In response, Hiraku sends a special request to Michael. Not long after, the girls receive a standard piano, which quickly becomes popular throughout the village. Unfortunately, Hiraku soon regrets the purchase, as they refuse to stop playing it even for a moment. Several months later, Hiraku sends the girls off to have lunch, but completely forgets that he also needs to eat. Luz then calls him over from the fields to a shaded spot beneath the trees, and reminds him of the importance of taking breaks. After preparing some ice for his tea, he thanks her for coming all the way out to join him, though he also wonders if it's safe for her to be outside so often in her condition. She reassures him, explaining that the others have told her that staying active is actually beneficial for her. Even so, Hiraku continues to worry and finds himself wondering what it must feel like to carry another life for months. Later that evening, Tia and the other girls brought up the same question after dinner. In response, Lou describes it as feeling like she's carrying 2 cabbages in her stomach. Hearing this, they realize how much strain she must be under and ask if there's anything they can do to ease her burden. However, she tells them not to worry, as they have already spent months supporting her in every possible way. That said, she does admit that not being able to drink wine has become one of her biggest struggles. A few days later, Gran Maria and the other angels beg Hiraku to get rid of all the alcohol, because Tia and the others have stopped drinking in solidarity with Lou. Unfortunately, since they are so used to drinking, this has led to a noticeable wave of depression spreading throughout the village. Despite this, Hiraku refuses, explaining how difficult it is to produce high-quality alcohol. Instead, he suggests keeping it out of sight and allowing it to age for the time being. Days later, Donovan and the other dwarves ask Hiraku if they have committed some kind of crime because no one wants to drink their wine anymore. Hiraku then explains the situation with Lou and the new plan to stash all the booze until after she gives birth. So they get excited to make even more and promise to do something special for Lou. Weeks later, all the girls take turns presenting Lou with presents and goodwill charms. And after they all leave, she shows Hiraku a mallet Donovan brought over. Just as he asks if they plan to pound the baby out of her, her water breaks, so he steps out to give her space while Tia and everyone else turn their mansion into a hospital. Minutes after sitting in silence and overthinking, Hiraku heads to the carved-out hole in the great tree and spends the rest of the night trying to get his thoughts under control. By morning, he rushes back inside and meets Alfred, their beautiful son. After getting a crash course on how to be a gentle father, he carries Alfred and promises to raise him to be a strong man. Weeks later, life returns to normal on the farm. But after a hard day of work, Hiraku takes a look around and realizes how far they have come from when he first found the tree. So he decides to do something special for everyone. Days later, he summons all the representatives and introduces them to the village's official currency. They get confused by the sudden need for it, so he reminds them that they now produce way more crops and items than before. Since everyone places a different value on the items they trade, exchanging goods is no longer an effective way to conduct business. So he explains that they will measure value using coins. However, since it's not something they have ever done before, he decides to start by giving coins to the representatives and every major contributor to the village's growth, so they can use them to receive special items whenever they want. Before long, everyone becomes familiar with the system and begins using coins as the village's local currency. However, things nearly take a strange turn when a young beast girl attempts to pay Hiraku in exchange for a pregnancy. Fortunately, he handles the situation by deciding to let them rent him for a day instead. Weeks later, he organizes a late-night celebration for the entire village since Alfred's birth had not yet been properly celebrated. As soon as the party begins, everyone eagerly starts drinking whatever alcohol they can get their hands on. Donovan then brings out a special barrel of wine and explains that the mallet was specifically made so they could be the ones to open it. However, after they break it open together, he notices that Lou still isn't drinking and jokingly asks if another Alfred is on the way. She explains that she still can't drink because Alfred needs her to stay as healthy as possible while feeding him. After thinking it over, Donovan decides to set some of the wine aside so they can all share it once Alfred is older. The next day, in the demon capital, Beazle, Gratz and Ragnan conclude that forming a strong relationship with the Great Tree Village is the best path forward. However, when Beazle suggests sending one of their girls there for marriage, Galgardo becomes furious and firmly declares that Yuri will not be married off to anyone. Meanwhile, Michael dispatches his best men to prepare gifts for Hiraku and Lou, aiming to congratulate them and further strengthen their bond. Back in the village, Tia, Florim and Flora bring Hiraku inside to discuss the growing number of newcomers, as each of them has encountered over 100 individuals from different species who are eager to join. After considering the situation, Hiraku proposes establishing a second village since the current one can no longer accommodate everyone. He is surprised by how quickly they agree, so he reminds them that it took years to reach their current level of development. Even so, they decide to move forward with the plan, insisting that they cannot turn anyone away after the kindness he once showed them by welcoming them without expecting anything in return. That concludes the anime recap. As always, if you enjoyed, let me know down below and I'm out.